Okay, so we've just spoken about things to avoid. So cue cards, how to do them, laptops, things like that. We're going to talk strictly about body language here. So the important part is what you want to do is picture a little box around yourself, sort of between your shoulders and your belly button, let's say. And that's sort of the box where as much as possible you want to keep your hands within, unless you're doing something sort of obviously over the top. So in terms of sins, things to avoid, in your pockets is, in terms of body language experts would tell you, that's something that you do when you're hiding a weapon. Likewise, hands behind your back. You might want to do it for a brief moment if you're sort of being rather genuflect or kind of reflective. And as we consider this point, but you wouldn't want to live there in terms of your hands. Obviously never cross your arms. Again, that seems very aggressive, very standoffish. You're quite literally blocking the audience from your speech. And what I always find useful is most people have a natural sort of tendency in their speaking. They either sit here or there or something like that, or over here. Everyone has a sort of basic stance for their hands, for their gesture, for their body language. Obviously, as much as possible, you want to have a relatively neutral stance. You don't want to be doing too much of the splits or be doing anything sort of outrageous, kind of leaning or having bad posture, as I said before. Just makes you look smaller and less confident. So you want shoulders back, you want feet sort of natural length apart, and as a general rule, you don't want to go anything offside, so you don't want to be on a diagonal or anything like that. So keep in mind you've got your box that you're trying to communicate within, and most people have as I said, we call it like a lock. Basically, you want to be holding your fist or holding your thumb like that, or something like that, maybe that. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can have your hands in a resting position. What you usually want to avoid is just having your hands out, because then if you're nervous, people can see that, and it makes it look like you're a bit flitty with your ideas. So you want to keep it in the box as much as possible. Have some sort of a locked position to keep your hands in when you're not doing anything dramatic. And again, within the box is sort of where you want to stay. Unless you're kind of being very dramatic, you probably don't really want to extend outside that box too much, because as you can see on the video, it looks rather confusing and it looks like I'm doing a mime show or something. So find a natural position for your hands. If you've got cue cards, keep that in mind. You might want to do something like that, where you're tucking one hand behind the other, the cue card's sitting in there, or holding it like that, like a handshake. But keep in mind, you never want your hands below your waist or behind, because that just looks like you've got gangly arms, which in my case I do. So you want it as much as possible, keep it within the box. I hope that's a whole bunch of sort of relatively clear steps on things that you should try and think about during your presentation. To take it to the next level, you would look at your cue cards or your plan of your speech, and you'll plan out what gestures you really need to make during each phase of your presentation, depending on what you're talking about. So your goal, in the ideal scenario, you've planned out your speech, you've got cue cards, or you've memorized your speech, and then you want to think of what gestures you might need to make during your speech. So you might want to do listing, you might want to have an expressive gesture to encompass the whole world. There's a whole bunch of different gestures that you might choose to do in your speech to emphasize your points, rather than to just flap your arms around wildly while you talk.